Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Justin Murtis, and I'm glad that you are here for this Design Sprint Roundtable. Coming at you live, at least on my part, from scenic my in-laws' basement. I hope that you appreciate the view. Any complaints can be made out to them. A little bit about us. We are a group of product people that work in an agency called Crema that is located in the Crossroads Arts District of Kansas City. We've got a little more than 40 full-time employees, and we work with all types of organizations from startups to enterprise through the entire product process, be that problem solving, be that designing, prototyping, or multi-year builds. We focus on team, on culture, on product, and we are so glad that you are here to hear us kind of process through a couple of design sprints that we ran in the recent months. Now, if you're unfamiliar with a design sprint, then I will give it's backwards. Forgive me for this foolishness. This book is a book that was published in 2015. Some folks, Jake Knapp, John Zeratsky, and Braden Kowitz of Google Ventures were observing how meetings for Google Ventures working with their startups were often inefficient, or there was too much politics, or the extroverts were dominating conversation, or decisions that really should have only taken a day or two ended up taking 6 to 9 months because it took so long to get stakeholders in the room. And so they created what's called the design sprint, which is a greatest hits of business strategy, of social psychology, of design thinking, put it together in a battle-ready 5-day format where you walk in with a problem space and you walk out with a prototype that you have validated with 5 users. And so it's a really great way to go from I'm not sure what we want to flesh out to let's come up with a solution, put it in front of people and hear what they think, all in a matter of 5 days. It's been iterated upon over the last 5 years. There are 3-day, 4-day, 5-day, 2-week, 3-week, all kinds of different design sprints. Hello, Robert. Glad to see you there. And Crema has been doing workshops like these for many years. Every time we kick off a client engagement, we always go through a 2-day session similar to this, but we really started leaning into the design sprint 2 or 3 years ago. And it is unique this year, obviously, because of COVID, that we've been doing things all digitally. And so the design sprint can be an in-person experience. It can be a fully digital experience. And that's enough about the process. What I really want to do is introduce our team so that we can start processing the kind of work that we've done this year. So what we have here is we have a team that is made up of 6 other folks, of designers and product managers, strategists. And design sprints have served as facilitators, co-facilitators, and designers. Over the last couple of months, we have facilitated and ran design sprints for clients that are in healthcare, that are in retail, cybersecurity, nonprofit. And I had the opportunity to facilitate each of these. And these members that you're seeing here are the team members that I had the opportunity to work in these design sprints with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each one of them, and then we're just going to jump right into Miro, our digital collaboration tool. So up above me, we have Michael Luchin, who's a senior product manager and agile coach. To my top right, I have Brandon Blackman, who is a product manager. All the way at the right corner is Tyler Hilker, our director of design and strategy. Immediately to my right is Pamela, who is a product designer. To the right of her is Mary, who is also a product designer. And then beneath Pamela is Aubrey, who is a product designer. So what I've done is, and Larissa, if you can open up and show Miro here. What we've done is we've created 5 questions that we're going to be answering today. All 5 members of our team have gone in and answered these questions already. And so we're just going to jump right in to these 5 questions. You'll notice that some of them are for facilitators, some of them are for designers, some of them are for the full team. And then we're going to unpack those questions together. Really, this is kind of a retrospective for us, and so hopefully it can be valuable for you as we look at insights, as we discuss things together. So let's go on ahead and get started. So the first question, everybody, is what did you see to be the most valuable aspect of the design sprint for the clients? And this is for the respective client that you are working with. So why don't you go ahead and take your sticky from over in your workspace. And this is a lot of how we work together in our design sprints. We have an activity board like this where we preload exercises and everyone has a little spot around the table. So drag those over. All right, so let's start it off, and we're just going to go from the top down. So I see Brandon is up at the top. So Brandon, why don't you unpack what yours is, and then give a little bit of information about it.
Yeah, so the ability to test and fail forward. What I mean by that is design sprints, in their nature, they're experimentative. So you're testing something that hasn't been tried before. You have no idea if it's going to work. You've maybe got some hypothesis around it. But design sprints give you a way to produce some pretty mid to high fidelity solutions that can be tested in front of users and validated. And we like to think that those tests, validate our initial hypothesis, but sometimes they don't, and we find out that that's not the reality or what we thought it was going to be. And so it's really nice to be in that kind of environment where even if you fail, you're moving forward. And so I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, who's next?
That is mine. I found it really valuable to spend such a dedicated amount of time really uncovering the root of the problem. So often clients will come to us with a specific solution in mind, but in this case, we get to spend significant, intensive time together with everyone in the room who has a voice and is a key stakeholder to this issue, and really defining the problem at its fullest. And to me, that helped move design forward really quickly. And it's kind of a rare experience to do that so fast and intensively with all the right people.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback, Mary, on what you're saying, I remember with this specific client that we had several different conversations with key stakeholders, and each one kind of elevated a specific value that they had or a specific element of the problem. And it was only once we finally got everyone together that we could understand what was kind of really at the root of what you're talking about. And if talking to only one stakeholder didn't get us all the way there.
Exactly.
All right.
That is me. And I think it's having everyone in one room with that dedicated time, a person from each business unit or department representing their team to work towards maybe not the best direction, but the right direction to move with an idea or a business idea, product idea. I think that's the most valuable thing, because they don't always have the time to have all these dedicated people in one room for 3 days.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pamela, you're tapping into a trend that I think we're going to see in a lot of these. So I'm excited to see that. All right, next up, I think this is Michael.
Yep. And actually building off of that trend, I selected the ability to jumpstart product development quickly and confidently. When you have everyone in a room for 3 to 5 days and you're going through a lot of activities to narrow down the problem and figuring out the what and validating that problem is actually a problem, you're able to roll into actually solving that problem much more quickly than maybe doing it over a longer period of time, sometimes as much as several months. So that's always exciting for me, that design sprints allow you to just jumpstart into actually solving the problem as quickly as possible.
Okay. Tyler?
Yeah, kind of along with what Mary and Pamela were saying, getting people in the same room, it's one thing to say, hey, let's do this for a day. It's another thing to say, let's do this for a whole week. And when you are committing to paying for people to either fly out to where you are or to be in the same room as you are, or just spending lots of money and committing that is a powerful motivator to get people to say, all right, I'm going to clear my schedule and we're just going to do this together and knock it out. And then also, the more, you like how I snuck two responses in on this one.
I'd expect nothing less, Tyler.
But the more we get people in this room and they're committed to this headspace, the more we talk about the solution that we think we're here to design and validate, the more it becomes clear that we don't actually understand the problem. And so the design sprint and some other activities are really helpful in diagnosing that and talking, making sure that we all understand the problem and we agree on that that's what's most important before we actually start solutionizing it.
Yeah, and to that end, Tyler, that's been a common theme that some have seen with the design sprint, is that it's a really great opportunity, but sometimes the problem space needs to be explored first. And so I know there's been a lot of industry leaders. Jay Malone comes to mind of New Haircut with problem framing. That's something that we've adopted, that we're not going to start a design sprint unless we have at least a day before the design sprint to better understand the problem with the client, to make sure we're moving. We put up those bumpers so we know what we are and what we aren't talking about. Aubrey, I think.
Yep. So I think just the nature of the way design sprints works takes people out of their element, and they learn to work in a very different way from what is the norm. And so doing that kind of allows them to think in a different way and progress more quickly, especially with the structure of how design sprints work. So what a lot of clients will say to us afterwards is, what we did in this week would have taken us months, if not years, to figure out outside of this format. So it's just a unique format that allows you to really come together in a unique way that's very targeted and allows you to figure things out more quickly. It's not something that a client should do every week, but when you do it, it's really effective in moving things quickly.
Yeah, Aubrey, I think that's an interesting point. This idea of this is not the long-term solution. We don't think that everything in work should be only design sprints. We believe that it should be a tool in a toolbox. And maybe an essential part of a toolbox that we can drop everything at a certain point to do these things, but it's not sufficient for the product process. We still need to do a lot of iterating, validating, more validation with users, slowly building out that MVP. Yeah, so it's not everything, even though it's pretty great. Tyler, like you, I couldn't keep one. I said primarily I think the value is having time dedicated to leaning into the problem space, not just justifying a hunch or a potential solution. Again, focusing on the problem, not just the solution. And then secondarily, I think it's important for people, especially these days, to know that collaboration and innovation is not contingent on offices and conference rooms. That has been a common theme that we've heard with each and every design sprint that we've ran digitally, is people saying, I didn't know this was possible to have this type of output, this type of collaboration. For us, for our team to really feel like a team and have this feeling of camaraderie and energy and momentum that came out of sitting behind our computer, which is kind of the opposite of what work can be when people think about working from a computer. All right, next up, this one is just for the designers. Designers, what was the most challenging aspect for you during your design sprint? And if you answer that it was me, then my feelings will be greatly hurt. All right, we're going to start backwards here. Aubrey, I'd like for you to go first.
Yes, so this is two-tiered. So before design, it's really hard to not start designing ahead in your mind. When you start hearing the client team discuss these ideas and the potential problems and the framing of those problems, you kind of start to think, oh, this could be that, or, oh, that's really exciting. So it's kind of hard to practice restraint and say, no, like, I don't want to either steer things in one direction, and no, I don't want to get invested in this one idea when that's just one of the potential ideas. So it's really easy to get ahead of yourself, especially when you're excited to design the potential solutions. And then during design, prioritizing and not perfecting. So when you have such a short amount of time to create a testable prototype, we usually do things in sprints. So we have 1 to 2 weeks to kind of work on these sections of design to actually create something in a matter of a day or two, depending on the format of the design sprint, and have it be testable. You can't worry about every pixel. You can't worry about those things in the way you normally do. So it's a very different way of working for designers. But it's challenging on the design side. It's a great opportunity for growth.
Hey, Aubrey and Mary and Pamela specifically, how do you think through that prioritization? Like, where do you prioritize? Where do you perfect? How do you think through that as a designer?
In my mind, you perfect the idea, you prioritize the communication of idea, and secondarily is, oh, everything is aligned and this is the perfect amount of space between these tab items, right? It's, how do we communicate the idea effectively? And so prioritizing anything you need to do that, because it's really about the idea, right? At the end of the day, what we're coming out of design sprints with isn't about, oh, wow, that is the most beautiful thing we've ever created. That is such a good idea, or it's not such a good idea, and why. And so just being able to test that is really the outcome.
I would say also it's focusing on the things that we want to test. Sometimes we only have 5 people interviewing, so we want to get the most out of the information they give us. So a lot of our minds with usability, like we want to make it feel usable, but also we want to make things that wouldn't work in a real world product, but for the purpose of testing, it needs to be there. And because it is a just good enough prototype to test. It's not a final product. So having that mindset that putting the usability aside, I think it's a restraint that you need to have because you're only doing that for 8 hours, 10 hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would kind of add to that I had to kind of put my ego aside a little bit as well, because as a designer, I want to show the client my very best. And being in a design sprint, having a day to maybe more, but not the normal amount of time I'm used to, it feels really challenging to show them something that is maybe even a sketch is enough, or a wireframe is enough. And maybe it's not a beautiful, well-rounded, pixel-perfect prototype that's clickable. Maybe that's not what's going to serve the client the best. So that's kind of touches on my next point, actually, that the most challenging thing for me was gauging that level of fidelity that would be both most valuable to the client and to what we're trying to test. Communicating just that idea first, communicating the problem, the simple solution. And then also what is even possible. Like if I try to do it at the level of fidelity that I'm used to, I'll get stuck designing a date picker or some tiny little UI pattern that doesn't need to be designed at this point in the process. So that was a big challenge. I stumbled a couple times and had to just keep moving.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Mary, that it goes against what we normally do for our clients, right? We build full products, and so it's hard not to go to that nth degree. It's like we have to learn. It's a new muscle that we have to learn in a way as professionals.
Absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
Pamela?
Yeah, to add to that, and because, like Mary said, what serves the client the most, and I think create a prototype that it's pixel perfect and it's beautiful and looks functional. It will create an emotional attachment to it for the client, right? It's like getting like a design of the perfect house, but that cannot be built. So while I was doing this, I was like, I need to make sure I don't create something that creates that emotional attachment, because the outcome can be that it doesn't work, that this idea maybe doesn't test well. So the outcome is both. It's very positive. Oh, this is a great idea and this is the right direction to go. But it's also that, hey, we were wrong. So how do you balancing that so it doesn't create an emotional attachment to it? I think that was the challenge I had throughout that design day.
Yeah, and that's tricky. That's something that we're fleshing out. We're still learning how to communicate that with our clients and working through that with our clients. Is what does it mean that we walk away with designs? Because does that mean that 2 months after design sprint that the client is saying like, yeah, but the designs you did had this thing, and we're still working through fleshing out how do we lower that fidelity so that it lowers that emotional attachment. Right? It's the idea of I'm not going to name. If I live on a farm and I have chickens, I'm not going to name the chickens because we may need to eat the chicken. Similarly, we may not want to create something that is so, well, y'all have already said it, so I'll shut up. All right, so facilitators and co-facilitators, what did you see to be the most challenging for the client during your design sprint? So I'm going to drag one over for me here as well. I see, oh, looks like we lost live stream. Okay, it's back. Great. Now, someone, while the co-facilitators are doing that, someone put in the comments in LinkedIn a cupcake or wedding cake exercise as prioritization. That the building and testing of the cupcake, that's what the sprint is. But the wedding cake is the end goal. But we need to make sure we understand the recipe. I like that. That's a great word picture. All right, most challenging for the client. Brandon?
Yeah, so especially in 2020 in our virtual environment, being able to get through that learning curve around virtual tools Like, for example, the one we're seeing now is Miro. I saw some people asking about it, and the answer was also posted correctly. We are using Miro. But even just like basic tools sometimes, like I consider Zoom, for instance, like a basic tool, or some like your instant messaging tool. Sometimes when people get thrown into that and it's not their day-to-day, even if they've had experience with it in the past, there's just a little bit of a lag of getting people through that learning curve. And of course, then you add in sometimes the internet's not working properly. Sometimes your LinkedIn live stream freezes, so you have to refresh. So there's just a lot of things that go around that. And so that's probably the biggest challenge that I consistently see.
That's good. I put forgetting preferences and personal passions in order to pursue the goals that the team decided on. And so the design sprint necessarily is supposed to be a funnel that guides you from ambiguity to a little bit of clarity, and then into a prototype, right? And I've seen that times where I think we're making progress, and I think, okay, we've said we are pursuing this goal and not this thing. And then when we get to the sketches, I see people designing for that thing that they liked 24 or 36 hours ago, and they're not answering the question that's at hand. And so I think part of that understand is a matter of communication. I think that's making sure that we truly are on board. I also think that means we need to spend more time asking questions of those that aren't participating as verbally to make sure they truly are on board, not just thinking that dots are sufficient to knowing that the team truly is ready to move on, when someone may have that something still in their head that they're not going to let go of unless they can process it. Tyler?
Yeah, so I referred to this earlier, but we heard numerous times throughout each of the sprints that I was in where people were just thankful for, in a way, us giving them excuse to block off time on their calendar. And it's because the design sprint, whether it's 3, 4, 5 days, plus a problem solving day, whatever that is, it allowed them to kind of soak in the solution. And it's kind of like that research that says on vacation, it takes you a certain number of days to fully settle down and escape from the work. It's very much like that, where you need to get away. And of course you have to maintain the emails and Slacks and whatnot, but this long headspace where you can just sit and soak and mull on things was really, really good for people. And it allowed them to kind of let go of some of the things that you were just talking about, Justin, where it's like, oh, I've got all these other things to worry about. And it's just like, I did what I could to take care of those things. Now I'm going to solve this really important problem that's worth committing to.
Yeah. I want to kind of tie yours back, Tyler, to I think one of the difficulties of digital design sprints is that it's harder to fully commit time and headspace. Mm-hmm. If we can lock people in a physical room, in like a nice way, not like a.
No, we do that.
That's right. That's how we get people to do design sprints with us. We lock them in until they agree to do design sprint with us. Is that once we're in that room, we can turn off devices. There's no children involved. There's no, we control almost every variable when it's an in-person experience. But digitally, there's not that. We are at the subject of each person's family, Wi-Fi connection, technology, all types of things. And so I think it's a more difficult thing. You have to be more intentional digitally.
Yep, agreed.
All right, Michael, round us out here.
Yeah, so I added trusting the process. A lot of the design sprint exercises, especially early in the first half of the design sprint, build on top of each other, generally leading to like the significant aha moments that our clients expect about halfway through that sprint. And so maintaining that emphasis on the early exercises may not necessarily be demonstrating any immediate results or takeaways from the design sprint, but they're also so valuable and so foundational to creating those big takeaways is so key in making sure that there's this full 100% engagement and commitment to that.
So Michael, what does that look like for you as a facilitator? You're in the middle of day 1 or day 2 or whatever, and someone is clearly not engaged. They're even like hesitant or kind of standoffish, and they're saying, this isn't worth my time. What do you do?
Yeah, so part of what we do for that is we tell the story. We share what is it that we're actually doing and why is this kind of this early chapter of this design sprint book, if you will, that we're going through this week. Why is it valuable to get to where we want to go? Where are the outcomes that we want to to produce by the end of the design sprint. And being able to walk through that can usually help create a shared understanding that raises bought-in commitment, collaboration throughout those early days.
No, that's good. That's really good, Michael. All right, full team, let's come back together. What is one thing that you would do differently if you were to do your design sprint again? This is a time where I'm actively asking you to admit ways that you can grow to the internet. What would you do differently? Brandon, I don't want you to be at the front. I know how badly you want to speak first, though, so I'm going to force you down here. All right. Michael, you're going first again, buddy. Or I'm going to have you carry through.
Oh, man, I wanted to get the last word on this. All right, so I think, doing it again is it's important to emphasize that our design sprints are not only a trusted process, but they're a guideline. We can iterate that tried and true design process mid-flight best outcome for our clients. And somebody who has devoured the book Sprint and has designed, this is a really tough pill for myself to swallow because I know and our team knows how valuable the design sprint process is. But oftentimes you get into a design sprint a few days in, and maybe you realize like there's a bigger challenge there to unpack, or maybe it's important to maybe further isolate an already isolated problem that you wanted to work on. And so it's really important to have an outcome focused mindset, but leverage the design sprint process as a guideline, not necessarily a means to the end.
All right, this is Mary, I believe.
Yes. So as a designer, when you're doing the design days, you're a little bit alone. And I found myself kind of fall into the patterns that I already discussed earlier that I'm used to, just pursuing perfection, pursuing the kind of fidelity that I usually like to kind of push myself to do. And in this case, it's super important to continually ask myself if I'm designing towards the problem that we've defined at the very beginning of the design sprint. And so, like I said, sometimes I would get stuck doing a specific little pattern or focusing on one problem I wanted to solve and not asking myself about the whole. I don't know exactly what I would do next time to push myself towards this more. Maybe it's conversations with the facilitator or just asking to be checked in on and kind of asking to be held accountable a little bit to that goal. But that's something I found myself falling into.
Yeah, and I want to call out a little bit of the context. Tyler, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to give Mary a bit of a shout out, and Aubrey and Pamela, because I know that the three of you have each done this, where specifically on the UI, as you're designing things, you do a lot of work up front before the design sprint even starts to get your design files ready so that when you jump in, there are fewer decisions to make. So we'll use a starter kit, or if the client has a design system, we'll tap into that so that we're not having to rethink everything from the ground up. And I think the three of you are good at that, and it saves a lot of time. And so when often clients are like, I'm paying you for a week. And it's like, no, actually, you're paying for us to be prepared for that week and then to tie it up nicely at the end. Like there's a lot of work that goes in before. So we'll have to pull in their design system, whatever brand guidelines they have, any content, photography, things like that, so that on that one day of design, we can sprint, if you will, and we can make the most of that time so that we get the best feedback possible from the users that we're talking with.
Yeah, we'd like for it to be like a kitchen that's ready for us on a cooking show. So we've already got these ingredients out there. We've already poured everything. Things are clean, and it's ready for us to get working. One person asked, how much time do you spend doing design versus meeting with stakeholders for requiring alignment, review design options with pros and cons and demos? And to that person, to Jeanette, I'd say that it varies by client. For some design sprints, we have a kickoff on the design day, and then we have 3 meetings throughout the day. with them. So we touch in for 30 minutes, only maybe with a couple key people that need to be providing feedback, just to make sure that we are staying on the right page. We also have a collaborative Slack channel with our clients. Mary's one that she's describing was a really interesting design sprint because there was 3 days of design and they needed really high fidelity for what the output was for that. So there's even more pressure and isolation because there's not that, there's fewer of those check-ins along the way. And it's more, Mary, we met like in the mornings and they said, yes, let's work on these things. And you kind of worked all day long. And the next day we reviewed. Also international clients, so time zones made it a little bit different to have like midday checkpoints. So that's one thing that made Mary's unique.
Hey, Justin, a bit more response to that question. That's where some of the preparation comes into play, where and the acknowledgement among the team in the room, but also those outside the team, that we're going to be focusing on these aspects of the problem. It's not going to cover off on every single requirement. It's not going to do these things. We're not trying to necessarily validate every requirement. We're trying to validate whether or not this is an appropriate direction for us to pursue development of a product or service. And so ideally, you aren't meeting with every possible person on Wednesday at the end of the day to get sign off on these designs. Ideally, the people in the room that are participating in the design sprint are empowered enough to say, this is the general direction, and we can tweak the requirements and details as we go along. And honestly, that can be, it can help your organization develop a sort of shorthand for saying, yeah, we know this box here represents that set of requirements, or something like that, because you're not going to design every possible iteration that some requirements might demand for.
All right, next up, this is mine. Have a mandatory design sprint intro session where we use a fake business model to show the full process, as opposed to only saying trust the process. I've heard people say phrases like, wow, now that I really understand the design sprint, I want to play, or I want to do it again. I think of it like explaining a board game. The board game 7 Wonders is notorious for you read the rules, you go through it once, and it's only at the end that you really understand what you should have been doing at the beginning. And so I think it would be helpful, and I'm working on this myself to say, what does it look like to create some sort of fictitious business model? And I know AJ and Smart does this with Jake's Magic Laundry service with their masterclass, where it's a really simple business model to understand. You walk through all the decisions and you can understand why they're going this way in order to reach the end of the week. So that in the design sprint week, we can say, all right, so this is where we're going to be doing this. Now, if you'll remember from this example, this is when they did that. So there's some connection there as opposed to learning as you're doing it, so that all energy can be focused on executing the sprint, not learning and executing the sprint. Tyler.
Yes, I would pay even more attention to the outliers and non-consensus inputs, specifically asking the question, when somebody votes differently than the majority or others, pressing into asking them, what do they know that made them vote differently than the rest of us, and what might be important about that? Because I want everybody to feel heard, and dot voting kind of does that, but they might have some important information that the rest of us need to know, and that can change how we might have voted. So it's important to get those in.
Yeah, absolutely. Technical difficulties on my part. Camera's getting fixed. All right, who's this one?
That's me. So so I think it's really important to try and understand the client dynamics and individual skills beforehand, really understanding where people are going to have the most valuable input, and understanding how teams work together. We say a lot that we're in the business of people, and whether you're a designer or a facilitator, it's really important to understand that. Again, these are not one size fits all. And so understanding what the team that currently exists, how they interact, can allow you to identify gaps and say, typically, maybe we don't have a designer do this, but in this scenario, maybe they need a little bit more of this. Or typically our facilitators would do things this way, but in this scenario, they could be more of use of providing X, Y, Z. So understanding the people, understanding the team really allows you to do that. And again, it's just that same idea. Design sprints are not one size fits all. And so having this conception that things are going to go to plan going into it, I think is something where you're always going to fail at that idea. So just being flexible and understanding how to work with each client team individually.
Yeah, That's right, Aubrey. All right, Brandon.
Yeah, so this one I'm actually going to add on as a layer to yours, Justin, that you mentioned, having like that fictitious business model that you could run the client through. I would add on to that, like to provide interactive activities inside of that intro meeting to get them familiar with the learning curve that I mentioned in the last question. So if they need to add stickies, have them add stickies. If they need to upload a picture, have them upload a picture. Like just do those walkthrough things. So a lot of the learning curve can happen in that intro meeting.
Yeah, and one thing that I know we all experienced, Michael, I remember you had to do some breakout rooms. Even like sometimes we did a really good job. Aubrey, I know that you helped on this. We had an intro Miro board where we sent it to the clients with a Loom video attached. Hey, do all these things. Add a sticky, move the dot, do this. And yet when we got to the design sprint, some had done that, some hadn't, but some people were even like, how do I zoom in and out? And so even that is like, okay, we're operating with a different level of base understanding of these tools. And so sometimes I think knowing the clients may mean one-on-one training beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and last, this is Pamela.
So like Tyler said, before we start the design sprint, we get familiar with the brand, we go over the brand guidelines, create a starter kit so we can jump and start designing on day 3. But something that I skipped was the first thing that I did was create a wireframe. Something that I should have done is create a content outline that I needed from the client. I think I did that middle of the day. So that's something I would keep in mind next time. Also, pay close attention to pay equal attention to everybody. Right. I was like Aubrey said, designing on my head based on what the decision maker was saying and going in that direction, and then kind of wasting my time on day 1 and day 2 ideating when we went a completely different direction. So I would try that next time.
That's good. All right, so last question. What was your biggest takeaway from your design sprint? And I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A if there is any, so we're going to have less commentary. I'm talking to myself here, I know. And if I talk too loud, feel free to shut me up, or talk too long. All right, so who is going to go first? This person. Pamela.
So they require commitment, and this is something we already said, that commitment from us and the client, especially on their side. It's really hard to commit yourself for 3 days with no interruptions, but it definitely requires that, and also be open-minded, especially as you represent different business units, department, open-minded to everybody's input.
That's good, Pamela.
This is very similar to, I think, what our clients' takeaway often is, but this was my first takeaway with the first design sprint that I ever did, was that having a small group of not only people in the know, but the right people in the know coming together for a design sprint can solve problems in a week that could take months or years. So, you can dedicate the same amount of time for short term, but full time, or you could do it for long term and limited time. But for a design sprint, the short term, full time really is just so superior. And so it's the way of working in that format that's very unfamiliar to people. People are constantly working on a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So to take people out of that element, put them into something where you're fully dedicated to one thing, allows you to get way more out of that time than if you did a little bit over weeks instead of doing it a ton of time over 1 week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it really well. For me, I would say having strategic co-facilitators and designers provides exponential value to a client. When people talk about, hey, should we have a co-facilitator? Should it just be a main facilitator? Can the client design? It's often discussed in means of just like productivity. Like, can a facilitator do this and this at the same time? It would help if a co-facilitator did that. But that's ignoring the strategic value, and having each one of y'all on calls and on these meetings, these sprints, it was just so valuable. You were able to provide things that I could not. You were thinking about ways that I wasn't. You're providing more input and clarity and discernment and strategy for the client. And so I think having a cross-functional design sprint team as opposed to just a figurehead facilitator, man, it provides value, so much more value. And then from a facilitator perspective, don't be so married to the process that you aren't willing to make the pit stops or detours that come up, and then get back into the process that you intentionally crafted. As a facilitator, you crafted the agenda for a reason. Don't forget why, but at the same time, you need to be willing to take a pit stop and make sure that you're taking the time. Tyler hit on that. If there's people that aren't talking, lean into that. If there's confusion, don't be so married to your agenda that you're not willing to go. Brandon.
Yeah, so validated way forward and alignment across teams. I know that has a lot of buzzwords in it. So what I mean by that realistically is, I think one of the hardest parts of getting design sprints to happen is getting all of the decision makers, like there's a VP that needs to be in the room, or a president or a chief, making sure they're in that room. And I know it's a big ask of them because it's 3 to 4 days of their time consecutively. But the biggest takeaway from that is that you're walking away with a validated way forward and alignment. And I think for those of us that have been on teams in the past that haven't been aligned, or they've been working on something that hasn't been validated in front of their CEO or their chief of product, it can be really discouraging. And so this is, for me, like the biggest design sprint is being able to have alignment across all the teams.
Yeah, that's good. All right, Michael.
Yeah, so in our world of distributed work, the work that we're doing in design sprints lives on with our Miro boards after the fact. And so this was something that I noticed pre-COVID by accident, out of necessity, just due to travel schedules. We had to use Miro a couple of years ago on a design sprint. And it was incredible because I was just focusing as a facilitator on making sure that the design sprint was successfully executed within Miro, and it was. But then just organically, the development team, the design team, the product owner, all just started organically contributing and adding to that board. And it started to live alongside us as a key and growing reference to the work that we were doing. And so it was so incredible to see, like, yes, design sprints are an incredible time box tool, but the value doesn't stop at the end of that time box, especially if you convert it to some sort of a digital form like Miro. It can live on far after.
That's good. Mary?
Yes, mine's kind of a two-part as well. This first statement has been said quite a few times over this call, but basically dedicating the amount of time that we dedicate to solving the problem first before attacking a solution with the right people enables much faster, better work. Like Aubrey said, she gave that gorgeous little formula, and it's so true. I found that to be extremely valuable. And also personally, as a designer, I found it really important to take ownership over what I didn't know, because in the first 3 days, you're really trying to absorb as much as you can, and you might be working in an industry that you're not super familiar with. So asking the right questions and being strategically minded enough to kind of look forward and say, do I have the right content, the right perspective, the right user in mind for being let loose? It helps you so you don't flounder on your first design day and kind of run in circles. So that was really, really valuable, and I'll keep doing that next time.
That's awesome. I love that, Mary. Tyler?
Yeah, y'all can read Committed Cross-Team Discussions, change the way people and teams see their role in getting things done. And put another way, design sprints are in a way one of the gateways or feet in the door. It's a foot in the door to not just solving problems better, but seeing the way that we work together in a fundamentally new way. And so, like Michael was talking about with Miro, and that becomes something, we have this ongoing, flexible, living reference to the way that this product should go. That's huge. And Justin and I, you and I were in a design sprint, and we were having some conversations, and there was a question that somebody in the room couldn't answer, and so we had to go out to somebody outside the room And that response changed the trajectory of the design sprint. It's like, oh man, we should have invited that person. They should be in this room, and they couldn't for good reasons. But it was illuminating to that team to say, we need to broaden the scope of our questions, not to involve everybody, but to be a bit more incisive about how we select people. It's not just the people around us that we're familiar with. It's like, oh, this person has the keys that we need.
Yeah, that's good. So you've heard our team process through some of those things. Some themes that I noticed that I wrote up earlier, having read these. Trusting the process is something I heard. Fidelity is not the goal. That we are not solving the product right now. We're solving the idea first. And then identifying the right problem is more important than finding the right solution. Another theme. Digital is just possible. It can be amazing with lots of pre-work. I want to note that it's taken a full Crema team to make this experience so seamless and valuable for our clients. There's no replacement for simply spending concentrated time with a problem and team. And then digital is more time efficient, but there's also a much higher learning curve. Those are some of the themes that I heard. Crema folks, please feel free to jump in here and leave those in here. It is 2:01, so we're a minute over. I want to thank you for joining. If you've been sticking around, I'm going to stick around at least to answer questions that I see online. Just so you know, this link is going to be shared out as a view-only link. So this little placeholder, I'm going to include the YouTube video here. You'll notice that there's references here. We have 4 templates, including our full design sprint template is here in Miro. We use Session Lab for our agendas and Figma for our designing. There's an official remote sprint guide that we collaborated on. This is the official one with Jake and John, the book reference. And then here's a couple things from Crema, video client testimonials, less than a minute, a video case study referencing the one that Tyler was talking about, and then our design sprint site as well. And so when you're taking a look at this, also feel free over here to jump into Crema's website, jump into our YouTube channel, our LinkedIn. We'd love for you to get connected. If you have any further questions, if you want to shoot the breeze about design sprints, if you're interested in someone facilitating design sprints for your team with a cross-functional team like Crema's, we'd love to talk. If you're interested in learning how to facilitate design sprints better internally, and you want help learning how to do that as a team, we'd love to help. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to Crema through our website, or just come on over to my in-laws' house. I'm in the basement. They'll let you in. Hopefully this has been valuable. Thank you, Crema folks, for joining. It's been a great year for us, for design sprints, for workshops as a whole at Crema. Our clients have appreciated them, and we're looking forward to what we have in 2021. Now, at this point, I want to answer some questions. So again, I'm going to stick around. Crema folks, feel free to stick around. And we're just going to go through some questions here.
I too will stick around.
Thank you, Tyler.
Because I like sticking around.
That's right. All right. So we got quite a few questions here.
These are great.
One of the first questions that I saw was from Robert Scrobe of Dallas Design Sprints. He said, have you all tried prototyping? So prototyping is that idea of not just validating an idea, but validating it, or not just verbally or with a thumbs up or down, but with a credit card, right? If I'm going to summarize it right, that's the big summary is prototyping forces someone to actually commit to a solution, not just provide opinions about whether or not they like it or not. Mm-hmm. For instance, a paywall behind, or a paywall that says, yes, I want to pay to receive information about this when it goes live. That says a lot more than just someone saying, yes, I want it. And I'll say, no, we haven't experimented with prototyping. Part of that is because a lot of our clients are in the enterprise space, and some of our clients only have 10 clients themselves. And so for us to test that with the users that's not how their industry works. But I am really intrigued when we talk about the startups, when we talk about entrepreneurs who are exploring a new business venture entirely. I think prototyping is a great way that we're learning, we're reading about to see how we can implement into our own process.
Yep, Justin, on that, Alex Osterwalder of Strategizer has done some really cool podcasts and webinars on how he's done that. And I inadvertently signed up for a webinar or class that he was testing based on different price points. And so he's talking about this thing, and then I found out, lo and behold, I was part of the experiment. But he's done some great work in that, and I've done them personally, and they on side projects, and they've been really good for judging future investment. So absolutely, I encourage that stuff. Obviously, there comes a bit of planning that goes along with that, but that can be really helpful.
All right, so Michael, I want to ask you this one. Are there any questions or activities that you found that help get your audience to the root or the right problem effectively? What do you say, Mikey?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think for me, like I love the art of synthesizing. So when you have a design sprint, you have a lot of people coming together, a lot of different opinions, and we run through a lot of initial exercises to flesh out those perspectives and understand kind of the context of where everyone's coming from, because there's a lot of value there. But then once you get to the stage of actual user story mapping or journey mapping, that's when like the synthesizing really comes into play and becomes a really good point of value, where you have to start making decisions about that story you're trying to tell for the product or problem that the product you're trying to build or the problem you're trying to solve. And so once that happens, then there starts to be then maybe somebody who had one perspective is like, oh yeah, I see how my perspective fits in, but I see how the other person's perspective also fits in and helps make this shared world, this shared experience even better. So being able to bring all these shared ideas together in that user story or journey mapping activity is so valuable.
Thank you, Michael. So the next question I have is, this is a YouTube question. We mentioned that the Miro board lives long after the design sprint is done. What are some examples you can share? What are some tips to make the board more accessible and easy to navigate? So Aubrey, I want you to touch on the design aspect of that, and then I'm going to ask Tyler to answer a little bit about how we use Miro after sprint.
Yeah, so we, as Justin had mentioned on the board or Miro board that we made for this that he shared, we actually created our own design sprint board. There's a lot of them out there that have been made and are super successful, but we were thinking, how do we take that and make it work for our brand, our company, how we do it, as well as for our clients? So we did a lot of things that were simplifying. We did things that were making it easier to navigate, adding more context, right? So we kind of approached our design sprint board in the same way that we approach the other things that we design, and making it more usable, making the information organized in a different way, making it more flexible. One of the things we really focused on is there are all sorts of different activities that could potentially be needed for a design sprint. There are the base activities, but we also think maybe this would be helpful, or maybe these are other things from context week that could be relevant for certain clients. So instead of having a preset, these are the activities we do, this is how long they take, we say here is, we created all sorts of different templates for all sorts of different activities. And we say, you can use these when you need this. You can use this board when you're needing to figure out this. And so it kind of allows us to really create a white glove service for our clients, and view each of them again as individual companies and with individual needs, versus making them all fit into one specific format that might not be right for them.
Yep. Tyler?
Yeah, and how that lives on, one of the great things that maybe should have found its way on a sticky note earlier is, one of the best things about design sprints is that it establishes a relatively clear shared context that we're operating in. So these are the boundaries of this problem for the design sprint, and that can become a single a place to anchor everybody's expectations to. Even if we go on to design something bigger on top of this, to use the cupcake and wedding cake analogy, even if we've done a design sprint around the cupcake and we want to build out this wedding cake, this Miro board that we put together in the design sprint is still a powerful way to maintain shared context. And so then we can build in that same Miro board. We can continue adding content, hashtag content. We can continue adding materials and workshops and exercises to that as we progress. And then at some point, things might delve off into other Miro boards, but you can still link them back easily enough into that one Miro board that is a source of truth, as it were.
Yeah. I think one thing that's important to do is to make sure we polish up the Miro board. I mean, this is a kind of facilitation basics, as it were, when we get into the digital space, making sure that every element that needs to be locked is locked. making sure that we polish up things. So sometimes we make two different Miro boards. One is the actual board that shows everything that happened, all the comments, all of the dot voting, all the sketches, as opposed to let's then move over and kind of make a summary of main decision, this, main goal, this, main, and kind of summarizing it that way so someone could easily say, oh yeah, here's what we looked at. And then hyperlinking to those elements in the previous board so they could say, all right, we said yes to this, but what were the other things we said no to? Who voted on what? Those types of things. So I think it's helpful to keep a single source of truth and then iterate from there.
Yeah, the best design sprint board is not necessarily the best layout and organization for evangelizing that throughout the rest of the organization. So that cleanup is good.
Okay, next question from Mohammed. Hello, Mohammed. Mohammed was just a part of the Global Virtual Design Sprint a couple weeks ago. What would you tell when the client asks you as the facilitator what metrics define whether or not this is a good design sprint result or if this is a successful prototype in order to move on to the next step, for example, development? I want to go back to Michael for this one. Michael, I know you've done a lot of thinking in regards to what makes it successful. How do we know if we're ready to move on? And then Mary, I want you to touch on, are we ready to move on to development? Because I think your experience really plays into that as well.
Yeah, so to take the first part of that question, when we start a design sprint, we're going into it with a problem that we're trying to solve and get like a validation on. And we can get a validation one way or another. One way, we might actually get validated that, hey, there's no value in continuing to develop and build this out. And that is still a successful design sprint in that case. We just have learned one way not to go about solving it. The other option is if we do figure out like, hey, this is validated, something we can build on, or maybe there's at least enough of a mixed bag in terms of the user testing results that we've narrowed our uncertainty down to continue to explore that further, then that would be another good use case of like, hey, let's continue to explore this into development. We have a great baseline that we started with the design prototype and can go on from there.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Justin.
I was going to push it to you.
As far as being ready for development goes, personally, the design sprint that I got to be a part of was with a client that we already have an engagement with. So I had a lot of experience with the products and with the business model. And so for my experience, I got to take what I produced out of the design sprint and continue to work on it in further sprints that were a little bit slower, a little bit more focused and conscious about development. So something that I did create in the design sprint is now being developed at this point, but it took a couple months. So I would say it's not a norm for a design that comes out of a design sprint to be ready for development. It's usually a chance for the client to kind of reevaluate and take what they learned from the testing and move forward into some sort of further development with it. But every client's different. So I just don't think the designs that I created in 3 days were fully ready to go and be produced.
And I know that part of that comes in the expectation before a design sprint. We're not going to, part of the pre-work for us is understanding what the role is in of the design sprint and what output they're looking for. Usually it is validation, but there are times like with Mary, that this is a client we've been working with for 4 years. Their goal was we want the most amount of work done in the shortest amount of time. And so we knew how to work with their team, their developers, to know exactly what we needed. Mary worked to make sure that Figma was ready to go, so that we were interacting with all of everything that was dev ready. Aubrey, I know that you worked with this client as well last year, and you had to work in Ant. I'm trying to remember Ant.js, or was it Ant Food? I'm trying to remember what. Regardless, whatever it was, their developers said, when you're designing, we need things this way, and so that's how you made sure to design it. All right, this is a free-for-all. If you could replace one activity with the design sprint process with something else, what would it be? If you have anything, or just say like, this is one that I don't see being super valuable.
I'll go first because I already have it. One of my favorite exercises in all of digital product land is mapping the customer experience from end to end. And obviously that's a big part of the first day of a design sprint. But instead of replacing it wholesale, I like to do what's more like a a lightweight service blueprint where you are cataloging the customer's journey, but also the organization, how the organization supports that particular journey. Because oftentimes that below the surface journey is just as important in validating certain things, because you can test something above the surface with the client to get validation that you need to make certain changes, but also mapping that out can illuminate certain structures or disciplines or postures underneath the surface that can be holding that product back.
I have one. I'm not going to necessarily say, so I think lightning demos are incredibly important, but I think there needs to be another version of that happens later. So when you actually say this is the problem and we think this might be the solution, saying, okay, now everyone break out and go do research and make sure this thing doesn't exist. There's not really a lot of time for that in a design sprint, but if everyone could take a few minutes and say, let's go find, or at least, what are the competitors, and, what's the value these competitors for this idea are providing? Where are they lacking? In establishing that and making sure that you're going to be able to provide an outcome and create something that is going to be more valuable than what already exists, and it sets itself apart from any potential competitors.
Yeah, and lightning demos is interesting because in most of our client conversations, the demos that they have already been discussed or shared, especially when we're in a digital space. Someone's like, oh, yeah. When you say this, I think of this product. And someone shares their screen, or we drag it into Miro, or someone else is like, oh, yeah, you remember that thing that one company did a while ago? And we drag that in. And so lightning demos is sometimes like we've already talked about the things that they have on their mind. And other than that, sometimes the lightning demos can be grasping at straws.
Yeah, well, and honestly, sometimes that's better done during context week anyway, where context is one of those things. It's the week before the design sprint where we all review any research, analytics, the context in which we'll be working. So you have a problem framing workshop, a day of that, and then we get into that. And that's where, again, we say, I like this. No, that's nice, but it's not what we're going for here.
Yeah, and even, because sometimes when you don't have a context week, you're at the end of day one and you're still like, what is happening? So again, it's kind of what Michael had mentioned earlier about trusting the process. But sometimes, you can start to question, be like, oh, should we really be trusting this? So having things, I think, like Tyler's saying, having something like that even before, or having lightning demos be before, is also helpful for us to just be able to say, let's take all these words that you're saying about what this idea is and actually make it visual. I think for designers, that's always really helpful too, is seeing comparative versus just hearing what this idea is. So,
yeah, one thing, talking about designers, there was a design sprint we facilitated where we did not design. And it reached a point where their designer was saying we already knew where we were going. Everything else felt kind of superfluous. Once we reached the main conclusion, then to go into the 6-step user story mapping, they felt like it was not being a dead horse, but it felt superfluous. Robert, you mentioned quietly hoping that someone says Crazy Eights can be replaced with something else. I don't love Crazy Eights. There's yet to be a time that I have seen Crazy Eights provide significant value to a client. I think the way that I phrase it when I talk about these things is that notes, ideation, Crazy Eights, and then solution sketching, I said those first 3 are different ways that different personality types and different brain types may best come up with ideas. And so I don't think it's sequential, all right, now that you've done notes, you're gonna have great ideas. Now that you have ideas, you're gonna have great Crazy Eights. Rather, I think that for some people, that really condensed time may be valuable, whereas for other people, the ideas section may be more valuable. And I say that there was one client that was like, I like the Crazy Eight because it forced me to think differently about these things. That's great. That's how their brain worked, but it's not like Crazy Eights is a knockout success ever.
Robert, there's a variation on Crazy Eights where I've only done it a couple times, where you start with 3, 4, 5, however many ideas, and then you pass the sheets around, and you have to build on other people's ideas, and that for me.
Right. Yep.
It's more effective because I tend to start from the same place and then I have to work outwards. But if I have to work off of where Mary or Aubrey or Michael Justin started, their brains are just in a different space because they have different biases. And that can be much more effective
Mm-hmm.
than just the traditional crazy eights.
Yep. Michael, anything you want to say there?
Nope, this is exactly where my head is at in terms of where things could be optimized.
Michael, you're actually being sponsored by the Sprint book to be put here to say there is not one aspect of the design sprint process that needs to change.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So Barry, you ask a question. After you complete a successful design sprint session, you have a prototype, you use your feedback. Do you schedule a follow-up session with everybody to review the feedback and readjust as needed? Absolutely. Sometimes it means we let the client or one or two clients parse through the user feedback, kind of run through it with their team, gather together some key connections, and then they present, and we kind of guide the process. Other times it means that we walk through the full experience with their board members or their C-suite team to say, here's what we just did, here's the results we had, here's where we're going, do you have any questions? I found that one of the things I love about remote design sprints is, like Michael mentioned earlier, that it is an asset that lives forever. And what's so great about that is that I can record a Loom video. If you're not familiar with Loom, it's a screen recording tool and so much more, but it records a video of you as you're recording the screen. And I can spend 15 minutes walking through everything that happened and then send that to the team, and we don't have to schedule something else. Similarly, there was a time where I did a round of 10 or 15 pieces of user feedback for a team after design sprint. We did another round because the first round did not accurately reflect their audience and their users. And so at the end of all this user testing, I just summarized it, sent the Miro board, sent the Loom video, and we didn't need to schedule a time because it was hard to get everybody together. And so that was the perfect way of achieving that outcome without taking up the time on everybody's calendar. All right, we have two more questions. One is from Megan. Megan, your question is, I don't know where Megan's question is, so can someone put that on the screen? Any strategies on handling disruptive or distracting individuals that risk knocking the sprint off the rails? Another question is, how do we deal with Tyler during a design sprint?
I think you mean Justin.
It's a fair question.
Strategies on handling disruptive or distracting individuals. Who wants to take this? I'll say one thing and then I'll open up the table. One thing that I think is helpful is during breaks to make it an expectation that you may follow up with people one-on-one, whether that's via Slack, iMessage, Miro, or Zoom chat, however it is. Just say, hey, if there's any question, if we're noticing something, we're gonna follow up so that we can do that. And that's allowed us to have candid phone calls between breaks. That's allowed us to say, hey, I'm seeing this trend, wondering if you have any questions. Sometimes it's what is the main thing that they're dealing with and then addressing that head on. So I think that's one way of handling it. Another way of handling it is to use your facilitation power to say, right now we're going to mute everyone. Here are the exact things I need. If you're doing anything more than this, then I'm going to ask you to not do that and only participate in the specific task that I'm asking you to do right now. That's an easy way of saying, stop it. I want you to do this and nothing else. And I want you to stop it. What else? How else do you deal with that?
I think part of it is also just making sure that those individuals are heard and acknowledged by logging anything like in a parking lot on a Miro board. Sometimes they might be distracting or disruptive because it goes back to one of the earlier conversations we talked about where there's just challenged with understanding the tool and how to interact without distracting from everything else in the tool. And so one of the tactics we've used that's handy is a separate Zoom room or breakout room or whatnot to have a co-facilitator break off and talk and handle that. So that way things can keep on moving without anything having to slow down.
Yep.
One other thing I would say is sometimes I think there's a lot of different ways for people to be disruptive, right? And not all of them are bad. There are people who are disruptive in a good way. But it's one of those things where when it continuously happens, it can put you behind. You do have such a short amount of time when you're doing these things. And so it's like when it happens a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, you're at the end of the day and you're 45 minutes behind. And Justin and Michael are having these conversations behind the scenes to say, this is where we're going to cut down. This is how we're going to move things. And so there's just like an element of sometimes just having to say, really, really appreciate that feedback. But let's remember that this was the original question. You know, people can easily go on tangents. So when you see someone going down a rabbit hole, you know, having the gumption to kind of just say, awesome, but let's pause there and come back to that at a later time.
Totally. Yeah, I think having, Robert said, ground rules laid out, having a public agenda is great because you can blame the agenda. Makes it really easy to say, right now I'm looking at the clock, I hear what we're saying, but in interest of time, we need to move on from this. And so having something else to cast the blame on, so it's not a personal decision. We've already made this commitment together. We have this agenda that's public. Now we need to move on. Tyler?
Yeah, despite that being a convenient segue into the next question, Robert is right on. And this day of problem framing can be really good for that because a lot of times if somebody's being disruptive or they're throwing things off track, it's because they are not either on board, they're not bought in, or they just don't understand where we're going with something. And so not just an agenda, but saying, here's why you specifically, you people are in this room. We need these decisions. We need your brain for this reason because you're really good at this kind of thinking. And so that everybody understands why they're there. And then honestly, if it gets to the point where they're not responding to the kind of conversations that you're talking about, it comes back to you as a facilitator to get with the lead on the client side and say, why is this person here? Like, do we need this? Can we get that from somebody else? Because you have to have a hard question about whether or not this is actually worth it. And obviously that's a hard conversation. Justin, I think you were really good at having hard conversations with grace and saying, honestly, like I want to respect this person. I want their input, but not at the expense of the bigger vision and the goals we have for this design sprint. We need to ask hard questions.
Yeah. Tyler, you mentioned the word facilitator. I mean, if you're facilitating, that is your responsibility, and no one else is going to do it for you. Yeah. I wrote a blog talking about a character from the Monty Python universe called the Colonel, and the Colonel would occasionally show up and say, right, stop that. This skit has gotten far too silly, and he interrupts things, and that's the punchline, is that he just interrupts the scene. He arrests the people, and the scene is over. And sometimes it'd be nice if there was someone to come do that in our design sprints, to be like, right, stop that. You're talking too much. That's it. We said no to that, and yet you keep doing it. Out with you. But that doesn't happen. And so it is the facilitator's job to do it. And I think another way of doing that is simply actively calling on other people. There was a design sprint where one person was clearly poo-pooing a lot of things, and so it was our job to elevate the opinions of others so that they knew that they were still heard, even though everyone knew that this person was being a little bit less participatory.
That person will bring, sorry, Justin, that person will bring the rest of the group down. It will happen quickly, and other people will see our response to that. And so it's important to respond productively.
All right, and last question is from Lars, right? Let's see that question.
Hi, Lars.
Are designers executing high-fidelity designs within the design sprint? Yes and no. Aubrey, then Tyler.
Yeah, so this was a point I was thinking about earlier, too, as we were talking about the fact that it's really about the ideas, right? Well, sometimes the idea is about how an app feels, right? When you think about an app like Headspace, right, where it's really a feelings more sort of application. If you were doing a design sprint for something like that, how do you kind of elicit the feelings to get the feedback that you need around this idea? So there's this balance. It's all like, what is the idea? So again, at the end of the day, it's always about the idea, but depending on the type of idea, you could require something that has more aesthetic to it. Whereas if it's really about something more technical or how it works, then you're going to be more usability driven. So I think, again, it's one of those things where you have to be flexible, and you don't know what you're going to be making a lot of the times. You know, you're in end of day 2 and you're finally figuring out what you're going to be making. And so you just have to be really flexible as a designer to be able to jump in and make a website or a pamphlet or an application. And you have to be able to do it in any possible way that could be the best option for that idea. And so, again, just because it's about the idea doesn't mean that sometimes the idea isn't about how it looks and feels.
Yeah, that's a great response. All I would add, because I know Lars, hello, Lars, we don't often do them. I don't think we have done them in wireframes. Not to say that you couldn't, but because we are product designers, we aim just on in design sprints, but also our standard design and prototyping engagements. We start with relatively, we might start with sketches, but we move really quickly into high fidelity because that gets us better feedback on the whole. It does take a bit more time, but it's often worth it because modern design tools allow us to make changes effectively and quickly. And so the fidelity is sometimes in the representation, like Aubrey is saying. Sometimes it's very rarely, it's what I think of as a red line prototype. It is the minimum number of screens that you need to validate the questions that you have, or to get answers to the questions that you have. But they're generally not very robust prototypes visually.
And one thing that the design world and design tools have changed since the sprint book, right? That Figma has made seamless prototypes so easy. And so Aubrey's heart is starting to beat faster than I'm talking about Figma like this. But the things, even from going from Sketch to Figma, how easy it was to make seamless animations, like it really, high fidelity it's almost becoming, that's kind of like table stakes when it comes to modern design tools. And so I think there's a distinction between modern or high fidelity and high functionality. And so I think that everything that we design for Design Sprint is going to be pretty high fidelity, because with the right design library and with the right digital tools, high fidelity is I don't want to say easy, but it's a lot simpler. It's really about how much do we want to show that doing and what functionalities do we want to present. That's really where I think the fidelity matters. That we're not trying to show it doing everything. We're just going to show it doing these 3 things, but Figma has made it easy for that to look like it's an out-of-the-box app ready to go. Yeah,
that's true. And it all comes back to what you need to be validated out of this design sprint. It's a matter of, like one of my favorite stories from the design sprint book is, I think it's from the book, is the robot. And they just materials that they had at the time. They didn't have all these other things. And it was very, very basic, very low fidelity. And that's what they had at the time. And that's how they got really good feedback on what they needed to test. Yep. So not to say you can't use wireframes or paper prototypes or anything like that. This is that doesn't tend to be where we work.
Yeah.
If you're a designer trying to be a part of a design sprint, there is not a better tool to use than Figma. I just don't think there's a better tool to use than Figma in the world. I'm a little biased, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's so easy, right? When we first started using Figma, Tyler would be like, "Aubrey, you don't need to make all those transitions and animations, like focus." And I'd be like, "But no, it's so easy. I just hit this little button and then it does." So it's one of those things where it makes it so seamless and so easy. It's really exciting for designers. Because what used to on other applications, I won't drop any names, but what on other applications would have been extremely difficult and been, 20 steps and 20 screens to do this one little thing, you can now do with a click of a button in Figma. So it's really just invaluable to us in the way that we work, and our ability to take something and show a client and say, this is how this will actually work and this is how it will actually feel. With little to no effort is really exciting, especially when it comes to something like a design sprint and being able to test it and have it feel legitimate to the users.
And one thing I want to shout out is, I know Michael and I both experimented with Miro's wireframing. Miro's wireframing is pretty high fidelity in itself. And so if you're hearing Figma and you're like, I don't know about this, Miro's wireframe is far more than just wireframes. With the iconography they have, with the sets and assets they have, you can make a pretty high fidelity without knowing Figma. Is there anything else that anyone wants to add? I don't see any more questions, but I want to leave it open. Michael, Tyler, Aubrey, any last words before we head out?
These are great questions.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Again, we are Crema. We are a digital product agency. We do innovation, design, and technology that transforms, and we would love to further conversations with you. Thank you for watching this. Hopefully hopefully this is valuable. The Miro link will be sent out. You may be looking at Miro right now, and we'd love to help you as an individual or a company thrive. So get in touch. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Michael, Tyler, Aubrey, and the rest of the team.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Justin.